Let's talk a bit about the history of adolescence. Imagine yourself, ancient Greece or Rome, about 13 or 14 years old. If you're a boy, you'd be learning how to fight, or you might be studying philosophy or preparing for a public life. If you're a girl, you'd be preparing for marriage, managing a household, maybe even raising children. There's no such thing as adolescence. Childhood ends abruptly and adulthood begins. There's no in-between time for self-discovery or personal growth. Puberty meant stepping into full adult responsibilities, good or bad. As you can probably tell, this sounds a lot like what John Taylor Gatto was talking about in his talk about the extension of childhood. If you recall, he argued that our current idea of adolescence, this prolonged phase between childhood and adulthood, is an invention, a way to keep young people dependent, to make them wait years before they can take on real responsibilities. But is that really true? Have you been waiting years to take on real responsibilities? Are you being held back by this extended adolescence? Or is there more to the story? Ancient Greece or Rome, we're talking about 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. But how about the Middle Ages in Europe? You're 14 years old. In Greece, you were probably studying, raising a family, learning philosophy, or preparing for public life. But now in Europe, in the Middle Ages, you're likely already an apprentice learning a trade, or working the fields if you're from a poorer family. If you're from a noble family, you might be training as a knight or studying with monks. But still you're expected to step into adult roles almost immediately. There's no teenage phase, no years spent figuring out who you are. Adolescence, as we understand it, just didn't exist. I'm thinking Gatto might look at this period and say, see, this is how it's supposed to be. Young people were given real responsibilities early on, and they learned through doing. You wouldn't be sitting in a classroom for years on end, but you'd also have little time to explore other possibilities for your life. It's not really a fair comparison, is it? How would you feel about that? Would you be ready for those adult responsibilities? Would you feel cheated out of a chance to learn more about the world before having to make big life decisions? While you'd have independence, in some ways you might also feel locked into a life path that you didn't choose. Okay, we've gone from ancient Greece to the European Middle Ages. Let's fast forward to the Renaissance. Here things start to change, at least for some. Imagine yourself in Italy, surrounded by the flourishing ideas of art, science, and philosophy. If you're from a wealthy family, you might be spending your teenage years studying the works of the ancient Greeks and Romans, learning about new scientific discoveries, or discussing philosophy. From this period, from about the 14th to the 17th centuries, saw the beginning of what we might call a proto-adolescence. That's like an early form of adolescence, especially for boys, from elite families. You were encouraged to develop yourself intellectually and to grow as a person before taking on adult responsibilities. This is where adolescence started to become recognized as a time of potential, but only for a select few. If you were born into a peasant family, life probably hadn't changed much from the Middle Ages. You were still working the fields, marrying young, and taking on adult duties early. But for those who had access to education, adolescence became a time to broaden horizons, explore different paths, and develop intellectually. This doesn't really sound like the way we typically think about adolescence. So we see glimmers of something interesting here. Our schools, while they might well give lip service to the role of broadening horizons, exploring different paths, and developing intellectually, these sorts of endeavors require at least according to Gatto, independence and freedom to become one's own person. Taking required classes with a focus on achieving passing grades doesn't align well with the Renaissance notion of how a 13 to 16-year-old should develop intellectually and socially. Could one argue that even this Renaissance perspective was just another way of keeping people, at least the wealthy, delayed in their development of real-world skills? Well, maybe. But on the other hand, keep in mind, our notion of adolescence was not yet established, and we probably shouldn't let our current concepts of adolescence cloud the way we interpret the Renaissance adolescent development. Let's take another leap, this time into the 18th and 19th centuries' Industrial Revolution. Picture yourself in a dark, crowded city, working in a factory at 15 or 16. Education? That's a luxury for the rich. For most, childhood was brief, and adolescence as we knew it barely existed. You went straight from being a child, often from a young child, to working long, exhausting hours. If you were lucky, you might have learned a trade. If not, you spent your youth in factories, often in very dangerous conditions. Enter people like Jacob Riis, a journalist who exposed the harsh realities of life for poor children in cities like New York. His work led to child labor laws that pushed kids out of factories and into schools. This notable shift, marked the beginning of adolescence as a time to protect young people from the brutal realities of the adult world. When we listen to Gatto, we might be led to believe that he might see this as yet another way that society began to artificially prolong childhood and delay the taking on of adult responsibilities. But I don't know. It's not as if these children had the luxury to, as Gatto would say, create their own lives. For many, this protection meant an opportunity for education, a chance to learn and prepare for a better future. What do you think? Think of yourself in that industrial environment. Would you prefer to be in school, or would you be itching to get out there and work, to prove your independence? Gatto would say that prolonged schooling keeps you from real experiences, but others might argue that education equips you with the tools you need to change your circumstances, to take on the adult world with knowledge and skills you wouldn't have if you'd been forced to grow up too fast. Let's carry on. Early 20th century, psychologist G. Stanley Hall came along and gave adolescence its name. He argued that these years are a time of storm and stress, a period where young people are figuring out who they are and where they fit in the world. It was no longer just about preparing to work or manage a household. Adolescence became a time of identity formation, emotional exploration, and intellectual growth. Let me say that again. Adolescence became a time of identity formation, emotional exploration, and intellectual growth. Was Gatto buying it? No. He believed that by creating this extended adolescence, society was intentionally keeping young people dependent. He saw schools as tools designed to keep you from gaining real independence and from making meaningful contributions to the world as early as possible. Identity formation, emotional exploration, and intellectual growth, I think Gatto would say, simply doesn't happen in compulsion-based, compliance-based schools. Would you agree? Now recall, G. Stanley Hall argued that these teen years are a time of storm and stress, a period where young people are figuring out who they are and where they fit in the world. What if I told you that adolescence doesn't have to be stressful at all? Imagine living in Samoa in the 1920s, where Margaret Mead, a famous anthropologist, studied young people. She found that in some societies, adolescence wasn't marked by the same struggles and pressures found in the West. There wasn't a lot of tension or identity crisis. Instead, young people gradually took on adult responsibilities in a more relaxed, harmonious way. Mead's work showed that adolescence doesn't have to be a time of delay or storm and stress. It's shaped by the society you live in. Context confers meaning. Now, Gatto might argue that societies like Samoa had it right, letting young people transition into adulthood naturally, without artificial barriers like prolonged schooling. But Mead's work also shows us that adolescence can be a time for gentle exploration, where you learn at your own pace, without being rushed into adulthood or forced to conform. This sounds like it would resonate with Gatto. Think about your own lives. Would you prefer a more relaxed, gradual approach to adulthood, like in Samoa? Or do you think that having a defined adolescent phase helps you better prepare for the complexities of modern life? Are you imagining Samoa now? The sunshine, the gentle ocean breezes, the sound of the ocean? Okay, snap out of it. As nice as you might be finding Samoa in your imagination right now, let's jump ahead again. This time, picture yourself in the 1950s. World War II is over and adolescence has exploded onto the cultural scene. You're no longer just a kid waiting to grow up. You're part of a youth movement. Teenagers are suddenly seen as a powerful cultural force. You've got Elvis Presley and James Dean, rebellious icons that speak to your generation. Rock and roll, fashion, and new attitudes are defining the teenage years as a time of freedom and rebellion. Gatto would probably shake his head and say, now adolescence has become a marketing tool, a way to keep young people consuming and distracted. But think about it. This new youth culture also gave young people a voice. For the first time, adolescents weren't just following the footsteps of adults. They were creating their own world, their own identity. Rebellion, music, and fashion were ways to push back against a society that expected them to fall in line. What do you think? Do you think the rise of youth culture in the post-war years empowered young people, or do you think it trapped them in a new kind of identity, one that kept them from truly growing up? Today, adolescence has been extended even further. Many of you might be in school longer than your parents or grandparents were. You might not be expected to marry or start a career until you're well into your 20s. Gatto would say this is the ultimate extension of childhood, a trap that keeps you from gaining real independence. But let's flip the script. What if this extra time isn't a trap at all? What if it's a chance to explore, to grow, to learn about yourself and the world before you settle into adult life? The world is more complicated now than it was in the past, and having more time to prepare might be exactly what you need to thrive in it. So now that we've taken this little journey through history, through ancient Greece and Rome, the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, and beyond, what do you think? Do you side with John Taylor Gatto, believing that adolescence has become an artificial delay, keeping you from real life? Or do you see adolescence as an opportunity, a time for exploration, learning, and growth, where you can prepare for a future that you choose? Now, let's not forget that we are going to be tasked with educating adolescents. And given what we know from the history of adolescence and its evolution through different periods, it would seem that how we design modern learning environments can profoundly impact how young people experience this critical phase. The past teaches us that adolescence has been shaped by cultural, economic, and social forces, and as we develop new learning environments, we should take these lessons into account to create spaces that empower young people rather than simply controlling or delaying their development. Here are some key insights that can guide us. In ancient societies in the Middle Ages, young people were thrust into adult responsibilities early, often without preparation. While this gave them independence, it limited their opportunity to explore and develop as individuals. On the other hand, in the modern world, Gatto would argue that we've swung too far the other way. extending childhood to the point where young people feel stifled and disconnected from real-world responsibilities. A modern learning environment could balance these two extremes by offering flexibility. Students should have the chance to engage with real-world tasks and responsibilities like apprenticeships, internships, or project-based learning, while also maintaining time for intellectual exploration and self-discovery. Giving adolescents the opportunity to gradually take on adult responsibilities while still in a supportive environment could prevent the feeling of being either rushed or coddled. So I think we could say that it's worth keeping flexibility in learning and responsibility in mind as we develop learning environments. Let's talk individualized paths of growth. During the Renaissance, only a few privileged few were able to spend their adolescence in education, developing their intellectual and creative potential. Today, education is more accessible, but it often follows a one-size-fits-all model, where students are expected to progress in the same way, at the same pace. A modern learning environment could learn from Margaret Mead's insights about how adolescence is shaped by culture. Just as Samoan adolescents were given the space to transition into adulthood at their own pace, today's learners could benefit from personalized education paths. Each young person's growth should be respected and encouraged according to their unique strengths, interests, and aspirations. Whether through customizable curricula, mentorship programs, or alternative forms of education, we could design environments that allow students to take charge of their learning in ways that make sense for them. Let's not forget adolescence as a time of identity formation. G. Stanley Hall's concept of adolescence as a time of storm and stress reminds us that this is a period where young people are trying to figure out who they are. Post-war youth culture took this to heart, as teenagers began using their adolescence as a time to explore new identities, challenge social norms, and carve out a space for self-expression. This period of identity exploration is crucial, and modern learning environments should recognize that students aren't just acquiring knowledge, they're forming their identities. We can create spaces for exploration where students can safely experiment with ideas, values, and creative expression. Encouraging activities like arts, music, sports, debate, and civic engagement helps students explore different sides of themselves. Providing opportunities for both independent and group work fosters collaboration, while allowing students to discover their strengths and passions. Then there's real-world integration with learning. One of Gatto's most powerful critiques is that modern schooling often separates young people from meaningful, real-world experiences, delaying their independence. Historically, during periods like the Industrial Revolution, young people worked hard, but they missed out on education. Now we have the chance to design learning environments that combine both, learning through doing. We might incorporate experiential learning, where students engage with their communities, contribute to real-world projects, or solve real problems, so that the knowledge they gain in classrooms is immediately relevant. By creating a bridge between school and the outside world, we can equip adolescents with the skills, confidence, and independence they need for adulthood, while they're still supported by educators. Margaret Mead's research also reminds us that different cultures view adolescence in diverse ways. If we apply this lesson to modern learning environments, we should consider global perspectives and cultural diversity in our approach to education. Adolescents today live in an interconnected world where understanding global cultures and systems is essential. Incorporating diverse cultural perspectives, history, and problem-solving methods into curricula can help young people develop a global mindset. This also means recognizing that students from different backgrounds may need different kinds of support, and our learning environments should be flexible enough to accommodate this diversity. We should also bring to the conversation the role and power of technology. Today's adolescents are growing up in a digital world, a reality that previous generations didn't face. This can either be seen as a distraction or as an incredible tool for learning. Gatto might view technology as another means of control or consumption, but in reality, it offers unprecedented opportunities for students to engage with the world, learn at their own pace, and connect with others globally. A modern learning environment should harness the power of technology to enhance learning, not replace it. Blended learning environments where technology supports traditional learning methods can provide students with resources, collaboration tools, and opportunities to learn beyond the classroom. By balancing screen time with hands-on activities and face-to-face interaction, we can prevent technology from becoming a crutch and instead make it a meaningful part of education. Finally, let's not forget the value of building resilience and emotional intelligence. Given Hall's focus on the emotional turbulence of adolescence and Mead's recognition of cultural differences in how adolescents experience this phase, it's clear that emotional development is a key part of adolescence. In modern learning environments, we must focus not only on academic success, but also on emotional intelligence and resilience. Adolescence is a time of emotional growth, and students need support in navigating these challenges. Incorporating social emotional learning into the curriculum can help students manage stress, build healthy relationships, and develop self-awareness. Schools should be places where students can safely express their emotions, seek help when needed, and learn strategies for managing life's inevitable ups and downs. So, if we are beginning to think about learning theory and developing appropriate learning environments for the future, it might behoove us to take into consideration some of these historical insights. Looking back at how adolescence has evolved through history, we see that there's no single correct way to approach this phase of life. Every era had its own challenges, but each one also offers lessons for how we can improve the way we support young people today. The ideal modern learning environment should balance the need for independence with the opportunity for exploration, combining real-world experiences with the support necessary for emotional and intellectual growth. It should be flexible, individualized, and grounded in the reality that adolescence is a critical time for forming identity, skills, and the foundation for adulthood. The big question now is, what kind of learning environment would you thrive in? Given what we've learned from the past, we should feel a bit more prepared to create spaces that not only prepare young people for the future, but also empower them to shape it.